Well, it's that time again, that time when we step into the intersectional saloon and ask one simple question. Is there systemic racism in the world today? I'm joined by Ken, and I'm your host, Christopher Antone, and this is Three Pastors Walk Into a Bar. What's happening, Ken?
That's two, in case you weren't counting.
Yeah?
Yeah, unless we count Greg virtually.
Yeah. Well, I guess,
And Richard virtually, too, right?
Well, I suppose. I don't really count Richard at all, but...
The unnumbered.
Yeah, Greg is on vacation. He decided it was time to go on vacation.
Yeah, he's taking a long one, too.
Yeah, he is. Well, I told him to.
Deserves it.
Yeah, he does. He works entirely too hard.
For sure. So it's just the two of us in here today. So hopefully we don't get outnumbered.
Well, it's the two of us plus Brandon.
Well, there's
Hey,
that.
Brandon. All right. That was Brandon, not Kermit.
Or Chewy.
In case you're wondering.
Was that a Kermit or a Chewy or a crossover? Kermit. Okay.
It was a Kermit. It's a verified Kermit. So Colossians chapter 3, verse 11 tells us, here there is not Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free, but Christ is all and in all. So we're going to pursue the idea of systemic racism because there seems to be a large consensus of people out there today that are kind of shouting out this phrase, systemic racism. And if it exists in the world today. And I think it's a foregone conclusion that for some people it definitely does exist.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it'd be a good idea to kind of define what that means. So Cambridge Dictionary defines systemic racism as this: policies and practices that exist throughout a whole society or organization and that result in and support a continued unfair advantage to some people and unfair or harmful treatment of others based on race. So, based on that idea, what some groups are stating is that a lot of our legal system, a lot of the systems that are in place in our society, and I was thinking about this after our first kind of round with kind of discussing this idea. What kind of systems are they thinking are included in that? I mean, I know that they think that there are, like the legal system, I think they would say is systemically racist. But what other systems might be in place that they would view as being systemically racist? As this, in so much as it goes by that definition, that some people are advantaged and some people are disadvantaged. I mean, would they say that the workplace, for instance, like or job availability or whatever is systemically racist? Perhaps?
Yeah, I was just trying to think of some, and the ones that come to mind immediately. There are laws and infrastructure in place to prevent that. You look at sports. You've got Title IX, is it, for women, and I think that covers more. Look at the education system. You look at recruiting in business. You look at the military. You look at government offices. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just ignorant, as we say, but no big system that's fundamental to American life that I can think of doesn't have some kind of a corrective system in place as well.
Yeah, I wonder if where they collect a lot of this information and where a lot of their fear arises is the fact that they look at like statistics and then they draw conclusions from those statistics. So, like for instance, as far as like police interaction with like African American men. Some would say that there are an inordinate amount of violent interactions with African American men than there are with white men.
I don't know what statistics they're looking at, because the ones I've seen are tell exactly the opposite.
And I was just fixing to say that, I mean, I just looked at the FBI statistics for 2022, and the larger number of people who interacted violently with police were white men. That was just like something. Now, I'll give you this, that black men were charged with crimes at a pretty high rate in comparison to their population base.
Mm-hmm.
But also, what was interesting about that was that African-American men were responsible for 33% of violent crime, but are actually only like 10 to 16% of the population that encountered police violently. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but
more of an urban bias.
I think that I'm going to try and say this as politely as I possibly can, but I think that police do have a bias when they go into communities that are largely black. I think they're more on guard. I think they are more prepared to encounter something. And if you wanted to say that is systemically racist, it could be. But a larger number of violent crimes are coming out of those communities. So it makes sense that they are driven to be more alert and more ready to pull someone over, or more ready to arrest someone. So it's kind of like this vicious cycle of culture interacting with people, and then race kind of gets thrown into the middle of it. I'm curious as to if race has as much to do with it as people think that it does.
Yeah.
I think it's more got to do with the level of crime that they encounter on a regular basis in certain communities. And I know I'm probably going to be called a racist for saying that, but I think the statistics play it out pretty closely. If you look at the FBI statistics for last year, an inordinate amount of violent crime, exponentially higher for black men than it was for any other group.
Yeah. This would probably be a topic that Richard could weigh in with a little bit more firsthand experience. But I do know we used to live on the other side of the state border, and there are certain neighborhoods in Spokane that have a reputation of just being bad neighborhoods, and you just you don't go there at night, you don't walk alone, you don't leave your car parked, all these sorts of things, because stuff happens, and everybody knows about it.
Yeah, there's a high crime rate and that type of thing, and you don't get, as a white person, you don't get caught there at night by yourself, kind of thing. Yeah, that all happens, and maybe that could be considered racist as well. I don't know.
I wouldn't call it systemic, though. At that,
I wouldn't call it systemic for sure.
There's an organized campaign to make it so.
It's not by design, or at least you might not think it is. I think that there is a level of systemic racism, and we've talked about this before, but I think there is a level of systemic racism. I just don't think it comes from the places that people think that it comes from. I think my own personal opinion is that government assistance programs are racist. I think that they are inadvertently targeting, and maybe purposefully targeting, a certain group of people, and that government assistance is having a negative impact on their culture over time.
Do you think it could be kind of a case of, like, with affirmative action, that the program originally was instituted for valid reasons, but since then our society has kind of come out of a lot of that, but the program hasn't caught up to the reality?
Yeah, I think the programs are still based in the past and still fight against a tyranny that does not exist in the mind of the average American. The average American is not thinking to themselves, and the average boss is not thinking to himself when he sits down at his desk today, well, I sure hope I get some decent white men in here today. Nobody's thinking that. When you have an interviewee in front of you, the average typical American person is not calculating race into their decision on who gets that job. And that's, I think, probably one of the most,
unless it's to the other extreme, because their HR
or
department
because
is
they're-
trying to
yeah,
pump up their numbers to
you
meet
have to
some
have
regulation
yeah,
and government standard.
Yeah, you have to have a certain race in order to meet your quota, say, for instance.
So then that is systemic
That
racism.
ends up being systemic
Reverse.
racism in the opposite direction, for sure, which I think is what happens a lot of times with a lot of these cries for systemic racism or diversity, equity, inclusion, or critical race theory, or a lot of the things that people are really just drive people crazy in today's society. A lot of that stuff, if we would just let it be, it would probably be fine. We would evolve as a culture out of that.
Mm-hmm.
We already have. Look how far we have come since the 60s even. I mean, the growth of the human psychology towards race has grown exponentially since the 60s. And now that we're really focusing on it again, it seems like we're devolving back in the opposite direction. It seems like we're going back to segregate each other. Let's create safe places for just our race. Let's create a law that states that we have to focus on this one race as opposed to the other.
New programs.
It's like we're just going the opposite direction in our fear of this systemic racism, and it's funny that there are groups of people in the world today that would say that me even thinking about that proves that I'm a racist, and I don't even know it. That was one of the craziest things that I ever heard when critical race theory was a big deal. I think it's dying out personally, but when critical race, or it's transitioning into different ideas, because it's no longer really about race, it's more about transgenderism and LGBT. Yeah. So it's kind of evolved.
It's kind of broadening.
But when critical race theory was like a hot button issue, like right after COVID, one of the bonkers things was when people would tell you that, well, you're racist because you're white and you don't even know it. You don't know that you're racist. It's like, well, I feel like if I hated a culture or if I treated a culture differently because of their race, I feel like I would know that.
There's got to be some consciousness in there. I
mean, you can't subconsciously be a racist.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone to say something like that just demonstrates to me their own bias.
Mm-hmm.
How can you ever get to a point where race is no longer a thing if you're told that you're subconsciously going to be racist? It's like you can't make a conscious decision, and me making a decision to not be racist is racist. So it's like...
And how do you actively eradicate that?
There's no way you can't.
You certainly can't legislate it.
Which is what I think the whole core of the problem with the whole CRT thing is. I don't think, personally, that BLM had any desires to cure racism. I think they're just like Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton or any other extremist. You could go to the white side of that as well with the David Dukes and all those other guys, that they want to keep pushing this racism button so that they have a paycheck coming in. Because guess what? If there's no racism, why would you fund Black Lives Matter?
Mm-hmm.
There has to be racism. Racism is the reason they exist. So if you have to have racism in order for that to exist, and they've done quite well for themselves, actually.
A few of them have.
Yeah, there's some news articles out there about how well that they have done for themselves. And Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton, neither one of those guys are struggling either. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that can also needs to be calculated in when you're having a conversation about systemic racism, is that there are groups of people out there that desire for racism to be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
They push it. They want it to exist. And I think that's sad.
It is.
And I think the average American has no desire to be racist or biased or hateful towards anyone.
Mm-mm.
I think the average American wants to embrace everyone and wants to love everyone, and they want to be kind to everyone. And I think that's more along the language of what we need, other than, you're racist and you don't even know it.
Yeah.
It's like that doesn't help. There's no solution to that. There's no way out of that. And then if I try and help you, to rise above your circumstances, then I'm accused of having a white savior complex.
Right.
So it's a no-win situation for me. The best thing I can do is just step out of it, because then if I speak and use my voice, my white privilege voice, to speak out against it, then I'm just really a white savior. So it really is a nefarious state of affairs, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just my opinion about it, right? And everybody's got an opinion about it. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to hear from people of color.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? So we have 3 black gentlemen in our church, and that's a lot for North Idaho, by the way. North Idaho has like a 0.9% black or African American population,
Mm-hmm.
so it's less than 1% of the population is black. So, if you know a black person, that's not common.
Yeah,
you're in the 1 percentile.
You're very diversified in your circle of friends.
Yes, you are. So we have 3 of them here, and wonderful guys. I've spent time with all of them. One of them is a graduating senior in high school this year, and I took him to senior camp this year in North Carolina. We went to the Wilds, which is a great youth camp, by the way. If you haven't been to the Wilds, you should go. But had a lot of conversations with him, and what's interesting is that when you're with him and you're out just in the general public and you're just kind of hanging out and you're talking to people or whatever the case may be, you know how many times it's weird because of race? 0.
Yeah.
0.
All 3 of these guys, if you were blind, you wouldn't even know they were black.
No.
And that says a lot. And they are just excellent young men. I enjoyed interviewing each one of them. They represent themselves very well, very high quality character and integrity and dedication. My hat's off to their parents.
Yeah,
did an amazing job.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that'd be a really great conversation to have with their parents too, because how did you navigate all of this, and what did you do to raise such brilliant young men?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're brilliant young men. And they were adopted from Africa, so they have white parents, which if somebody hearing this is going to go, oh, well, there you go. They had white parents, so they're Uncle Toms, right? I mean, I can hear that coming into somebody's head as soon as they hear that statement. And I would just say to you, sir, ma'am, you are racist if you think that. I mean, you are so hung up on the color of someone's skin that you can't even recognize the brilliance of these young men. And I think that's part of the problem. And in fact, I played for you one time that whole thing from Morgan Freeman where he was, he was saying, it's like, well, I'm going to quit calling you a white man and you're going to quit calling me a black man. And that's how we're going to end racism. It's like we're just people.
Mm-hmm.
We're just people, right? And so I think that there's a massive conversation to be had about all of this, which is weird because you wouldn't think that a conversation about systemic racism would be coming from North Idaho, or that we would be qualified to talk about it, because North Idaho is traditionally the home of white supremacy in the United States of America. We had a large white supremacist kind of population back in the 80s and 90s, back when Ruby Ridge was a thing. But if you were to come up here today, I can in the 13 years that I've been here, I can show you on one hand the number of encounters that I've had with truly racist people. And that ends up being 0. I've not had any encounters with anyone who I would say exhibits a truly racist ideology. In fact, most of the people that are up here are from California.
Yeah.
and Oregon and Washington, and they're just kind of people that want to come to a place where they can enjoy their freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
And they want
That's
people
one
to
good
leave.
thing you could say that has immigrated into the state is a racial balance
Mm-hmm.
that has helped.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more here a lot more diversity in all different directions than there was, back 30 years ago, for sure,
Mm-hmm.
30
Yeah.
or 40 years ago. So yeah, that's
It's
true.
happening.
It is happening. And to the chagrin of some people, and that's not to say that we don't have racists. I'm sure that we do.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I would say that racism is a thing, obviously, because there are racists on both sides.
Yeah. At a
Yeah.
personal level
Mm-hmm.
and some groups,
Yep.
smaller groups.
There are people that hate white people because of some imagined slight that they have. And, you can bring up conversations about reparations and slavery and all that kind of thing. I mean,
that would be another conversation to have, that if there was any sort of systemic racism to be found in the Northwest and Idaho in particular, it would be with American natives.
you would, yeah, for sure.
There's systemic racism.
Yeah. Well, that would be a group of people where laws and policies were created to subjugate a people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
You don't hear that too much in the racism discussion nationally right now.
Yeah.
They kind of get left out, and to their credit, they don't make a big beef about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it would have been much better to just assimilate them into the culture instead of trying to imprison them on these pieces of land, But that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah. I do have pretty deep opinions about all of that. But in our conversation today, these guys that we talked to, well, you talked to them, Ken. You interviewed each of them individually and asked them about their experiences and perspectives about racism in Idaho. And we're not here to exploit them. We're not here to, say, hey, look, we know our token black guys. That if that were the fear, then you would never befriend a person of color, because you would always be afraid that they would be your token black guy. And I reject that idea completely.
For sure.
I'm friends with people that I like and I can get along with, and I'm not friends with people that I don't like. That's just the bottom line. I don't care what color you are. You could be green for all I care. As long as I can get along with you, and as long as we can, have a decent conversation, we're probably going to be friends. If you're a nasty, evil, vile person, we're probably not going to be friends. I mean, it's just what it boils down to. And these guys are exemplary human beings, and decent people, and we have just really enjoyed having them around here. But their conversation might be a little bit jarring to some people.
Might be, and we kind of chose this format because I thought it would probably allow them to speak more personally and openly than if we had kind of a round table here with everybody, and people just kind of agree with other voices that are similar to theirs, but none of these guys knew what the questions were going to be in advance, that they were going to be asked. They didn't know how one another answered them, and I expressly tried to not put words in their mouth and finish sentences for them or give them answers. And so what you hear in their responses, their recorded responses that we're going to play for you right here, are their own exact words without any influence whatsoever. And that's what we wanted to come out, so that you could hear it directly from them as if you had had a conversation with them personally.
Right. Good or bad.
Yeah.
Good or bad, right or wrong, or whether or not we agree with them or not. You're getting their raw kind of footage that they spoke. So the first question that they were asked was kind of a softball question. Is your family originally from Idaho? Now, none of the people that we interviewed, none of the guys we interviewed are Idaho natives, but their family has chosen to live in Idaho, which is the case with most people. It's rare to find a native Idahoan in North Idaho. I mean, there's probably 10 that I know of, and all the people that I know that are native Idahoans. most people have migrated in from other states, primarily because they didn't feel like they could live the way they wanted to live, or they were getting taxed out of their homes, or the laws were getting so oppressive that they could no longer enjoy living there. And interestingly enough, most of the states that they have left are states that are led largely by leftists.
Yeah.
And so they have fled up here. You know, I mean, you hear people, I get into Facebook conversations with people, and you hear people say all the time, you know, it's like, well, if this state gets any worse with its conservative Christian blah, 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 I'm just moving out. And it's like, well, you know, that is an option. Mm-hmm. Lots of people have done it. They've moved out of California, Oregon, and Washington to come up here. There's room. Yeah. There's room down there. Just saying.
And before you native Idahoans get upset and think that all these Californians or Washingtonians or Oregonians are moving in and bringing their liberal ideologies with them, there actually isn't any evidence to that.
No.
I did my own research into this and dug into the Kootenai County voter rolls over the last several years, where people have to designate a political affiliation, and there's twice as many conservatives moving into Idaho as there are liberals.
Yep.
So the overall conservatism in Idaho is actually going up.
You know, all the politicians that we asked them when they were on the campaign trail, when we asked them what they thought of the people that were moving in, all of them unanimously said the state is turning more red.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason for that, you know. I mean, people, but you know, I'm just saying, you know, it's like if you, that's the great thing about having states that have their own sovereignty, is that you can move from a state that you don't like their laws, and you can move to another state without interference.
You have choices.
Yep. And right now, you can sell your property for a good chunk of change here in North Idaho, because the property values are outrageous.
It is. I watched that happen in Montana. It is kind of sad, because people who've lived there their whole lives, they just get totally priced out of their own homeland.
Yep.
And it makes it tough. But
Yep. So, anyways, we asked them who if their family was originally from Idaho, and Manny had this to say. Emmanuel.
Nope. Been here about a year now, almost, or actually a little over a year now. So yeah, basically a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
You moved over from the west coast of Washington, correct?
Yep. I moved over from a place called Granite Falls, Washington. Loved it over there. It was a great spot. I was a firefighter in Seattle for Seattle Fire, and they went some ways with the vaccine that I didn't agree with, and so I decided to make the choice not to get the vaccine, and as a result, they fired me, and so I started my own trucking company.
You know, as a side note, you know what the largest racial percentage of people that refused to get the vaccine was? Black Americans. Yep. They were like, no, thank you. Which is interesting.
Yeah.
I think.
Company. And me and my wife, we had always wanted to kind of move around after we retired, because firefighting is usually a job you retire from. Well, the vaccine and the COVID and all that stuff happened and kind of accelerated our plans. And so we were like, well, let's go find a place where they seem to be more open-minded towards people who are more freedom-minded, I guess, nowadays.
And that pretty much sums it up. You know, I mean, they're looking to be freedom-minded, which it's weird to me that more people don't feel that way. You know,
yeah.
Like I would rather be free. And the kind of dogmatic belief in the goodness of our government is bonkers to me.
Oh, yeah.
It's just so weird to me. Like, following like leftist groups and things like that, none of them are talking about the Durham report. None of them are talking about the FBI whistleblowers that just came out. None of them are discussing the Clintons' involvement with that. None of them are discussing Epstein's list that is somewhere out there. You know, all these things that are floating out there that just point to this idea that our government may or may not be systemically racist, but our government certainly does not have our best interests in mind.
It's certainly systemically corrupt.
It is very, very
goes
corrupt.
all the way to the top.
Very corrupt. And so, you know, it's weird to me that we have this dogmatic kind of belief in the goodness of our government and put politicians in general. Like, they'll defend Biden up and down. They'll beat Donald Trump down as much as they can, and they can't see that they're just being the right, except for they're on the left. They're the same thing. You know, it's like their guy is in, so they're going to defend him with everything they got, in spite of anything that he does.
Yeah.
The debacle in Afghanistan, this horrible thing that's going on over in Ukraine. The border. You know, I mean, you got all this stuff going on that he's just blown.
Talk about systemic racism in government.
Yeah, no kidding.
Southern border.
But
what's that about?
We just can't see that, and that polarization is coupled with this whole systemic racism thing. You know, I mean, it's just another driver that separates us, and I think you're gonna see more of this kind of shifting of people groups in the United States of America as things become more tribal.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see a lot more of the shifting of people groups because people just won't compromise.
Mm-hmm.
They won't compromise. They can't compromise. And the only thing that we can do is try and force each other to live the way we want other people to live.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way it is. And so I can't blame them, you know, for wanting to get into a more freedom-minded place. So the next question was, do you believe that there is systemic racism in Idaho, in the U.S., and if so, where have you experienced it? So Judah was first up on this one, and Judah is a high school student, and smart kid. Let me just find it here. It's number 3. Here it is.
No, my parents, they adopted us, so like they're both from two different states, but they're both white, and my brother and I were black, and they've treated us the same as anyone else. They don't treat us special, or our friends, they don't treat us different, and our family, they don't treat us different either.
So, Manny said something next, so let's get to Manny's. That's Manny number 3. Here it is.
Well, based off of the definition of systemic racism, which is like racism in systems like, you know, government and social systems and all that stuff, it would be hard for me to say. I am very skeptical of that, and because it's just kind of something that's thrown around a lot these days. There's a lot of, I've had a lot of friends who have been white that were discriminated against based off of race nowadays. So, and then they say that's not racism because they're white, you know. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I would be skeptical. I haven't experienced it personally. I have experienced racist people, individuals, but as a whole, I'm able to own a home. Got hired with Idaho State Police, you know, and just haven't really experienced any racism that I know of.
Okay.
So, or systemic racism that I know of.
Yeah, cultural and social racism is a little bit different animal.
Yeah, there's jerks everywhere.
Yeah.
So it happens.
On all sides.
And not necessarily always jerks. Maybe they just have experienced have had a bad experience with a specific person, and so they look at all those people to be the exact same way. So they might not. I've met people, you know, in the military you know, I met people in the military, a lot of racist people in the military, and you know, eventually some of them I could call maybe a friend, you know, but eventually, like, you know, you work hard and, you know, they eventually, you know, you can gain respect from most people, you know, and if not, oh well.
Yeah.
I think he says it best, you know. I mean, when he, in fact, when he says that, you know, he can own his own home and he, you know, had started a trucking company, I think that he realizes that everyone has equal opportunity, but they don't always have equal outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the base of that discussion, you know, when you start talking about, you know, employment and you start talking about jobs and you start talking about money, you know, there's a disproportionate amount of money that is in white homes as opposed to black homes. Is that because they have less opportunities, or is it because their outcomes are different because of the circumstances around them? And, you know, I think that one of the guys brings up Ben Carson and has some interesting things to say about him and his past, which I think is pretty telling. But in the United States of America, everybody legally has the same opportunities. We have laws on the books where you cannot have a bias against someone hiring them based on race or sex. And if you think that has happened, then you need to file a lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
You need to pursue that because that's illegal. You can't do that. And so I'm wondering why there isn't as many lawsuits as there should be. You know, if it's systemic and it's built into the equation, then it seems like there should be a massive amount of legal pursuit of lawsuits and potentially even criminal investigations into it. You would think that would be a thing, but it's just not, because it doesn't exist.
You'd see also a lot of legislative action still being the big thing in politics, but you don't.
No, you don't see any new laws getting put on the books or anything like that because it's just not a thing. Like, people are, I don't believe that people are discriminated against based on their race or gender or ethnicity or religious values. I just don't think that's a thing in corporations. I think it's obnoxious to think that you have a board of directors and you have a CEO and they're looking at a line of candidates and they don't see the color. Let's cover up the color, right? Oh, well, look, here's a Stanford graduate. You know, he's got a degree in business. You know, he's done this, and this. He looks like the most qualified guy. You take the label off and it's a black female. Oh, well, no, let's look for the white guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's less qualified. You know, no, there's no corporations that are doing that. And if they're doing it, it's on the opposite side of that. We don't have our token black person.
Mm-hmm.
We need to hire a black person because of affirmative action. And if I were a black person, I would be offended if I were hired because of the color of my skin instead of the content of my character, in the words of Martin Luther King.
Yeah, I'd look somewhere else.
Yeah, it's just like, if that's the only reason that you value me, then there's no reason for me to work here. You know, so this idea that people of color are not being hired at jobs because they're people of color, it's just a ridiculous notion. Or even on the other side of that, if you wanted to talk about feminism, you know, the idea that women aren't getting, you know, all these CEO jobs because they're women. You know, no, I'm sorry. The reason
there's
that
gobs of examples.
Yeah, there's just tons of examples of women in high power positions that are doing that job. But the reason that there's a majority of men in there is because the men are willing to work the obnoxious hours that it takes to be the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation or multi-billion-dollar corporation. Most women are not willing to do that. They don't want to live that lifestyle.
And rightly so.
And rightly so. You know, I mean, but that leads too far down the whole gender role spectrum, we have to reject that because of, feminism.
Yeah.
So that can't be the case. It has to be sexism and misogyny, because these women can't be making choices for themselves that are contrary to our opinion. And so that's kind of where this all is leading to, which is where you kind of get to groups like BLM and, ideas like diversity, equity, inclusion. That's a big deal, that's coming into schools and things like that. Even like if you look at Coeur d'Alene school districts kind of syllabus for how they're going to approach their academia, diversity, equity, inclusion is a big deal in there. You're not going to see critical race theory in there anywhere, because I think by and large it's such a bad name. It's not going to be in there anywhere. And also, the idea that social emotional learning is just critical race theory wrapped up in a different package. I hate to tell you this, guys, but social emotional learning was around way before critical race theory was ever even a thing. And so that's been around a long time. And it's not, the tenets of it have not changed.
No, and it's needed.
And there's portions of it that are definitely needed. Because a lot of these kids that are coming to public school, their parents are detached from their learning. They don't teach them how to be decent human beings. They don't teach them how to get along with people. They don't teach them how to have compassion for one another.
Especially coming out of the COVID age.
Right. The one that you got to really watch out for, in my opinion, is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
That's the one that you got to watch out for, because it's diversity at diversity's sake. Diversity for the sake of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, well, we need equal representations of all colors. We need equal representations of all genders. We need equal representations of all sexual orientations. Well, how does that work out? If you have 10% of your population that's trans, just throw in a massive number out there. There's not even close to that many. But let's say you have 10% of the population that's trans, and you have 90% of the population that's straight, right? And you put a group of people together and you say they have to be 50-50. How is that a representation of your population?
Yeah.
So these are things that they don't really want to talk about. It's like, well, we got to have this. We got to have a white guy. We got to have a black guy. We got to have a, Asian girl. We got to have an Indian girl. We got to have a homosexual person. We got to have, it's like, okay,
There's
why?
only room for 3 on the team.
Yeah, why? Why do you have to do all that? It's diversity, equity, and inclusion has seeped its way into Hollywood, and people like Richard Dreyfuss are speaking out against this. Evangeline Lilly came out and made a statement about it. How it's just gotten to where you can't make art anymore because you have rules. And when in the world did we start making rules for art? Like, when is that a thing?
Yeah.
But that's what diversity, equity, and inclusion does. You have to have these certain things. And the Oscar committee, the people who establish the Oscars and give out those awards, if you don't fall in line with certain diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of parameters, then you're not considered. I mean, how ridiculous is that?
Yeah.
How ridiculous is that?
You can't make everything political.
Yeah, and so now you have, Disney putting out all these movies, and people are rejecting them because they're sick of it. There's like, Little Mermaid came out. Well, we need to make Little Mermaid black. Why? Why? Does it enhance the story? Does it make it better? Well, we can't have them sing Kiss the Girl because that insinuates that she needs to be kissed. It's like, okay, well, did you read the source material? Because she grew legs, got out of the ocean, and lost her voice for the sole purpose of getting Eric to fall in love with her. It's the reason she left. Well, now she's got to have a whole different journey and everything else. And then at the end of the movie, if you've ever seen Little Mermaid, Ariel falls off the ship. Eric saves the day by driving the boat into Ursula and stabbing her with the prow of the ship. Right? Well, that's all been reversed. Eric falls off the boat, and Ariel steers the boat into Ursula because, equity. So it's gotten so bad now that you can't even be an artist anymore without adhering to some kind of tyrannical diversity rule. And I think a lot of actors are really picking up on this idea. They're like, why are we doing that? Why did Tinkerbell have to be black? Why? What did that serve anybody? Yeah. What did that do for race relations in our community? Do you not think that there were black girls that were enamored with Disney before you started blackwashing everything? It doesn't make any sense that we have to now manipulate our culture so that we have the right mix.
So when you're at Disney World and the characters are walking around, what about the traditional white Disney character? Are they blackwashing any of those?
Nope.
Snow White is still white.
Snow White still
Cinderella.
Tinkerbell, when she
Rapunzel.
flies off the castle for the fireworks show, she's still white.
Okay.
It's just them catering to a very small percentage of the population. In fact, you don't see anything in the parks. When I was in the parks, there was no gender identity pushing. There was no racial, cultural kind of...
No drag shows on the side?
No drag shows. No, they weren't sitting there grooming children. This wasn't a thing in the parks. You didn't see any of that. It's just business as usual in the parks. And it's only happening in the media. And it's ruining a perfectly good thing. And I tell you another thing, too. If I were a black person and they were switching out all these white characters for black characters, I'd be pissed. Because you're telling me that I don't deserve my own story. I have to take stories from other people. Why aren't we talking about Tiana from Princess and the Frog? It was a brilliantly done movie. And brilliant story, based on the Princess and the Frog story. She was built and designed from the very beginning to be a woman of color, powerful, well-adjusted, with ambitions and goals. And she's just kind of thrown into the background because we'd rather just make Ariel black. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. But that's what's sacrificed at the altar of diversity, equity, inclusion is art itself. And I don't know how long artists will put up with it before they just start saying, look, guys, we're going to make art, and that's just the way it's going to be. And if that doesn't fit into your plan, then I'm sorry, but I'm not going to not do the art that I want to do based on your perceptions of what my art should look like.
Yeah.
That seems so...
Well, it's selling out.
Well, yeah, it's the complete polar opposite of what art is.
Right.
Art is supposed to be avant-garde. It's supposed to be in your face. It's supposed to be rebellious. It's supposed to be saying the things that nobody wants to hear. That's what art is. It's
provoking.
Yeah, it's the right side, or it's the left side of the brain. It is offensive sometimes, but that offensiveness makes you think. And I'm not sure why we have to sacrifice that art on the altar of equity. It just doesn't seem legitimate to me. But we did ask these guys, do you think that the BLM, diversity, equity, inclusion, or critical race theory movements have either helped or hindered racial reconciliation in this country? And this is what they had to say, starting with Judah.
They had a lot to say.
I think they've hindered because they're creating division between everyone. They're making white people think that they're bad and making black people think that they're like they might be special, or they might feel retarded, not feeling confidence, being belittled.
Ouch. Roba, this was Roba.
I feel like these, I believe you said 3 organizations, have hindered a lot of people, kind of throwing them back from, doing what the American dream is, working for your own deal, whatever that is, hoping that it's, a good cause. But, you wake up every morning, you're like, hey, I'm going to go and do my thing, and I'm going to bring money to the table. So I feel like these 3 organizations have hindered people to rely on the government, to rely on other people than to work for themselves, and to add that, doesn't help them rely on God also. So I feel like, they hinder a lot of people. They also create lots of division, because you have some people that are for it and then some people who are against it, and that alone already, divides people, and which I don't think is a great thing. And then also they tend to blow up the statistics more than they actually are. So, they're very, very small, but the media puts a lot of attention on these topics, shows it in people's faces, tells them that they have to accept whatever they say, and most people will do that just to conform, but to me it is a very small problem, and it's just blown out of proportion.
Yeah, I think that's pretty wise. And then Manny had this to say.
Going off of law enforcement, with Black Lives Matter, obviously I'm very new to policing. I've had a lot of experience with the Black Lives Matters and the organization, and I know about the Marxist origins of being an organization of trained Marxism to break down the system of systemic racism in America. I strongly disagree with Black Lives Matter, and I don't even like the fact that when people say Black Lives Matter and I say, well, all lives matter, and people say, well, they'll use this. I've had a lot of conversations about this where they say, well, you're discounting Black lives when you say all lives matter. I'm like, well, how am I discounting Black lives? I'm saying all lives matter. Like, everyone matters. We're all God's people, and I'm not saying that you haven't had a rough life, I'm not saying that it's by me saying all lives matter is not me saying that your experience doesn't mean anything. But what I am saying is, if we look at each other as equals and humans, we see each other as equals, then it doesn't matter. The thing that really I think people focus on, which is race, is used to divide the country. So with the CRT, critical race theory, it's being critical of your race and being critical of the choices that your ancestors made and supposedly made. Like, there's black slavers, right? There's black slavers, there's white slavers, there's white slaves, I saw an example of, I can't remember who it was one of those actors. They looked back into his history, and looking back into his history, it turns out he was a black slave, people, the black and the white thing, Black Lives Matter always comes about and always rises back up again when there's an election, because it makes people mad. It's very political. It draws in a lot of money, and people spend a lot of money, and then a lot of white people who feel guilty over their supposed racism causes them to feel bad, and donate a lot of money, which I think, in my opinion, I've argued with someone about this before, which I say, well, you know, I grew up, you know, I had two parents, which is one of the main, the main indicators of success in life, right? Having grown up in a two-parent society and mom and a dad and all that stuff. I grew up with two parents. My dad always, worked hard, had a job, taught me to do the right thing, all that stuff. I grew up with privilege, right? I'm black. You may be a white person who grew up in a single family home. The mom had to work. You came home and there was no one home. You had maybe met some friends in school, got into drugs or whatever, didn't finish your education, got pregnant early. Maybe you had less privilege than me, but you're white, so how are you more privileged than me? Mm-hmm. So the whole critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, even the premise of, George Floyd or Michael Brown or whatever, like, you're choosing people who were not saying everything was, clean and, awesome, but you're choosing people who are not even the representatives of what I think of a successful person, and people. What I'm trying to say is these organizations and these concepts, people are using these. It's more, I view it as more people who are leaders and the people who are not living in the ghetto or not living in, poor areas. These are the people who are gung-ho about these organizations, and some of the people who are living in those areas maybe are actually experiencing, maybe some systemic racism or some, I shouldn't say systemic racism, but maybe they have experienced some lack of privilege or something, but their neighborhoods are getting destroyed, and meanwhile, the other people who destroy them can go back home and after the day's said and done, and it doesn't. I think what benefits blacks is having that 2-parent home, support from the community, being supporting kids and giving them a mindset of success. Like not telling them from day one that these people are out to get you, blah 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 blah. Telling them, hey, life is, the world's tough, but if you work hard and you you do your thing, then you're gonna get to where you need to be. And your race is it's a thing, but it's we're all part of the human race ultimately, and I guess going back to the original question, these organizations are just way more of a detriment and a tool of elites to be able to push down the little guy and make them feel upset about something, which is perfect for someone who wants to control the society. So, yeah,
good.
I'm not buying it.
All right.
And like I said, I'm not discounting. I'm not saying that people haven't experienced racism, and I'm not saying that there isn't systems that people have suffered from, and not saying any of that. I'm just saying that these organizations are not the way.
Yeah. Completely unsolicited. It's amazing to me that that people tend to separate politics into color as well. But actually, there are a lot of very deeply conservative Black Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is an opportunity. He's talking about, I'm sure that there are systems that are oppressive or racist. And I think it's probably a good time to bring up the idea of the tyranny of low expectations, and how tragic it is. Because, I mean, if you think about it, right, black culture in the 1800s was relegated to slavery. That's what you had. You had a very few black individuals that had made anything of themselves to be influential or wealthy at all. Most of them, a vast majority of them, were enslaved on plantations as property. In just a little bit more than a century, black culture has niched out for itself a economic base. They have successful entrepreneurs, successful business people. We've had a black president. We currently have a black female vice president. We have African Americans in every facet of our government, even all the way to the Supreme Court. You may not agree with their politics, but the simple fact of the matter is that coming from slavery just a little over a century ago, the black culture has done a phenomenal job of rising out of where they were at. Just in that few generations that they have iterated since that time period. And that's only going to keep growing exponentially, given that they're given the same opportunities as everyone else. But here's where the problem comes in, right? There wasn't enough help for them. And so the government stepped in and said, hey, we're going to start giving you money to live on if you are below this poverty line and you have these kind of situations in your life, and we're going to start providing you with welfare, and we're going to start providing you with social services, and we're going to start providing you with all these kind of governmental benefits that are there to help you to not be in poverty, right? Which is a great idea. The problem is that the way it was designed to incentivize things that keep you from being successful. It incentivizes single moms with lots of children from different fathers. It incentivizes men to not be involved with their children. I mean, if you have a mom that's like, well, I'll get this much government money if I don't have a man living in the house with me, so we're not going to get married. You know, we can come over and we can have sex, but, you know, we're not going to get married. Well, then you have sex and you have another child. Oh, well, great. I get more government money, you know, and I get government housing, and I get, you know, government cell phone, and I get government X, Y, or Z. You know, instead of trying to proliferate an idea of a successful family, you know, you hear all the time these moms, these people that are saying, well, these single moms, they can't go out and get a job and raise their children at the same time. No, they can't. That's why marriage is a big deal, because it's a team effort. You know, and everybody hates those gender roles that are out there. You know, it's like, well, you know, women shouldn't be relegated to raising the children, you know, as if that's some kind of negative thing or something. You know, so we want to incentivize women to be empowered to go out and get a job and, you know, all this other kind of stuff. And it's like, well, that's fine. You know, go out and get a job. But if you choose a job, you can't raise a family too. That doesn't work.
Can't have it all.
You can't have all of it, you know, so you got to choose one or the other, because raising a family is a full-time job. Ask my wife, she'll tell you. And so it's this tyranny of, we expect you to not succeed. And it has led to generations and cultures of people that are just dependent upon the government. And they don't have any other they feel like they don't have any other kind of opportunity, which they probably don't in the society that they're living in and the culture that they're living in, because they have no one there promoting to them, you can do whatever you want. By the way, there is no reason why anyone can't go to college nowadays.
Right.
Your college is pretty much paid for. And you can go and get grants. You can also go and have your student loans. You can get student loans. And the interesting thing about student loans is you can defer them indefinitely. My wife has student loans. We've been deferring them for 10 years, right? And then eventually, at some point, they'll drop off. Like they say that there's no student loan forgiveness. There is. Yeah, if you keep them a certain period of time and don't pay for them, they eventually just wipe them off the books. That's the thing, right? But there's no reason for anyone to not go to school in today's society. It's just not there.
Especially minorities.
Especially minorities, because you do get preferential treatment. If you're a minority, you get moved to the top of the list and getting considered because of affirmative action. So you have every opportunity to succeed, but that's not what their culture promotes because of the tyranny of low expectations. And so I think if there is a racism involved, it is the government's interference with their lives. If you let them live their lives and you let them strive and be successful, they will succeed. I know that to be true because look what they did after slavery.
Yeah, the biographies of successful blacks is just full of stories of overcoming adverse conditions and setbacks and failures and
amazing stories.
Amazing resilience and bravery and courage.
And they were so much more successful as a culture before the government got involved. I mean, back before government assistance was a thing, there were a lot of families, black families, that had middle-income houses, and they were living in middle-income cultures, and they were, doing really well for themselves. Had you left them alone, they would have risen to be much greater than they are today. But the government just won't leave them alone. They feel like they have to hold their hand or something, as if they're incapable of being successful on their own, and I find that offensive. Well, I'm not even black, and I find that offensive.
It's a huge voting block now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what it boils down to, and people just can't see that they don't really care about you. They just care that you're going to be receiving a certain amount of money if you continue to vote for me. And, well, if you're a single mom and you have 8 kids and you're trapped into this government assistance that you have to have it to live, you're going to keep that going because what's the alternative? There is no alternative. You're trapped. You can't rise out of it because... And that's the racism. If you want to talk about systemic racism, that's the racism. It's a prison of low expectations because you get a woman with all these kids in a government housing, getting a government food, getting a government check. What's she going to do? She goes to work, she's going to lose all that.
Yep.
And she can't go to work because she's got 8 kids at home that she had to have to get the government assistance. And so what is she going to do? You tell me, right? And she can't find a guy to come move in with her to help her to become successful because if she does that, she's going to lose it.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's she going to do?
It's a trap.
It's a trap. And you get caught into it and you can't get out of it. And that, I feel like, is the real story of systemic racism. It's not about people not having the opportunity. It's about the government just can't keep their hands out of stuff. Just leave them be. Don't penalize them, but you don't have to nanny them either. They're grown people. They can be successful. I know they can. I've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
It just is. I find it very offensive that the government feels like they have to come in and save the day for these people. They don't. They're very capable of doing it on their own. But that's just my rant. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get some hate for that as well. The next question was, how have you experienced cultural racism and how has it affected your life? So cultural racism be a little bit different than systemic racism. This would be racism as it relates to people that they have experienced. So Roba is up first on this one. So let's see what he had to say.
In middle school, you'd have some, kids who were just, being rude and stuff like that. In middle school, I was going to the Coeur d'Alene Charter Academy, and this one guy, he was just making racial jokes and just saying the N word so many times, and I was like, okay, that's not funny. It's like the same thing as having me come to you and it's like, hey, what up? And then you just, fill in the C word. And so I was like, okay, I'm just not going to do that. So, I was like, yeah, I'm not that kind of the guy that wants to go report people to the principal, but because I just like, that's just not cool. So I was like, hey man, I'm just going to have to go tell the principal and, that's what it is. And I did that. And, after we just, he's like, yeah, sorry man, I was messing around. And it's like, yeah, I forgive you, man, but it's just, don't do that again. And after that, the rest of the school year and last year I was there, we were friends, and it was just a good time. I just kind of forgot about it, and, people learn from their mistakes and, hopefully won't do it again.
So he also had a really kind of cool story about his great-grandpa, which I'll play for you right now.
I had a great-grandpa, and he was, my mom says that he was racist, and I was really, really little. So we went down for naps, and I didn't know my great-grandpa was racist. So my mom had a conversation with him, and, he just, according to my mom, before he came, he just, the N-word was flying out of his mouth left and right. And so we wake up from our naps, and my brother and I, we were just elated to meet our great-grandpa. And my mom also didn't tell him that his great-grandchildren were also black. So that was a big surprise to him. And so when we are just, when we get up from our naps, he's like shocked. Because he was just saying that, not knowing that his two great-grandsons were black. And like you could just see, like my mom said that she just saw the sadness and stuff like that. And my brother and I, we were just so happy to see him, and it kind of like shook him up. He's like, wow, it's not about the skin color, it's about the heart. And there was we were walking to one restaurant, and he was just walking by himself, just like overwhelmed with everything and kind of like probably sad and stuff. And my mom told me that I went and grabbed his hand and walked with him, and he said that was one of the best moments. And unfortunately, he passed away a while ago, but he said that was just a great, my mom just seen that. It was awesome to see that. So to say that we are systemically racist, and to say that I essentially have had a great-grandpa who was racist, to be turned around in a half an hour. The only way that happened was God and of love.
He's not wrong. Love is the answer, for sure. Manny chimed in after that, so let's listen to what Manny had to say.
I've ran into some racist people here and there. I've ran into, and this is going back with the Black Lives Matter and the people who are feel that they have. So I worked in Seattle. One of my bosses, she was bleeding heart, white liberal, and she thought that, she jumped on every bandwagon that came out, and she would love to bring stuff up, and I'm not the person who's gonna just necessarily agree to agree. I had no problem arguing with the boss. It would be it never got really too serious, but not gonna, if you make a comment, I'm not just gonna agree with it. So I made the point that the very fact that you think that you can apologize to someone means that you think that you're above them, because you think that you have the right or the standing to be able to apologize to someone based off of your race. So in that view, I felt like she thought like, blacks were subservient, and so she was trying to overcompensate for something that she was guilty of, and it would come out, like expecting someone to have a certain experience because of their skin color. That's racism.
Mm-hmm.
So why, if we're supposed to be all equal, why do you need to apologize to me if you yourself didn't commit the sin?
Mm-hmm.
Racism, yes, I've run into Grant Falls. I'd run into racism, and I've ran into neo-Nazis, people at school, with swastikas on their wearing the jackboots and the swastikas and looking at you, and I mean, usually I think, wow, man, that's pretty funny. Like, my little more confrontational days, I would stare them down, and like, but usually I just kind of avoid it. I think it was one hunting season. I went to Washington, and me and my buddy Josh, we grew up together and known him since I was 6, and our parents knew each other. Knew them before my parents were married, his parents. And we were walking around in Omak, I believe it was. Was it Omak? No. Anyways, northeastern Washington. And we were walking around, and there was a guy with, prison tattoos, Nazi insignia and all that stuff. And we were walking around, and I saw him, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and then later on in the store, I saw him, and he had a mixed girlfriend, So, I mean, I know a lot of the prison stuff happens in the prison, and people get those stupid tattoos, and then, all the races band together in the prison, just based off of race. So, but to have those tattoos proudly displayed, I've ran into it. Like I said, I ran into it in the military. I had people say stuff to me. I had a guy playing, he was playing David Allan Coe, who says some stuff about, you're this, you're that. And he would play the music to me, and thought it was like the funniest thing ever, and I'm not going to say what I did over the radio, what I did to them, but we had a confrontation, and he stopped doing it later on. I'll put it that way. He got in trouble, and
good enough.
Yeah, yeah, you'll see people with their flags, and a lot of times it was like I said, I was in the military with a lot of people from the South, and a lot of them would have. I mean, I had friends who were black who had like the Confederate flag, so. Sometimes it's really hard for me to immediately say someone is a racist, even if they have like a flag, like unless it's like a Nazi tattoo, say they have a Confederate flag, right? Well, does that mean that they're just a rebel and they like are really about the Southern states' rights, and just don't know that, hey, that's a Democratic, the Democrat, Dixie flag, what it, really does stand for, Are they taking the states' rights part of it and kind of, trying to make a statement, and not realizing that the United States won, I don't know. I don't always jump straight to racism, and like I said, the racism that have experienced is a lot of times it's just been the reverse racism from the person who's trying to be extra nice because of my race.
Yeah, the unintentional racism of trying to be as non-racist as possible. Yeah, he had this to say as well.
I didn't grow up in a deep South, where things are way more separated on there's some black areas, where people live, and white areas where people live. But, where I grew up, going to elementary school, me and my sister and this other kid named Victor were the only black kids in their elementary school, And so kids would say stuff, right? But kids say stuff because either they don't know or their parents say stuff, and or you're different, But would they say something mean to the disabled kid? Like they just see differences, And I don't know. I mean, to answer the question, I don't know. It's cultural racism. It's there. And jumping into it and dwelling on it for me I don't think it's helpful at all times. If it's blatant, it might be, I don't see anything wrong with confronting it right then and there. But sometimes someone is stupid, and what am I going to say to, fix their attitude about me because of my race, which is the stupidest thing ever. Like, doesn't mean being black or yellow or red or pink or purple doesn't tell you anything about the person that they are,
Mm-hmm.
So I just look at it as something that's really sad for that person.
Doesn't tell you anything about who they truly are. It's a brilliant statement. Something that people really need to pay attention to. Well, we're kind of out of time. Ken, do you have any last thoughts?
I've just enjoyed this episode because it applies everywhere, inside and outside of the faith community, inside and outside of races, political parties. Everybody can learn something from what these guys are saying.
Yeah.
And it's been helpful to me. I hope it's helpful to our listeners. And there's more to come. We've got several other questions that we asked them.
Yep.
And they've got some great comments about it. So the discussion goes on.
Yeah, stay tuned for that. Well, that about does it for us today. As always, thank you for joining us. If you have a comment, question, or idea for an episode, send us an email at 3p@ethelbaptistchurch.org. I tell you what, if we use an interviewee or if we use your idea for a podcast, we will send you a 3P coffee mug.
Limited edition.
One of these. It's so special. Yes, so beautiful. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks to ABC and its members for generously supporting this ministry. And again, thank you for listening. And until next time, remember the Great Commission. Go into all the world, reach the lost with the gospel, build disciples who can do the same. And with that, we are out.